The first thing you need to understand about Devil's Canyon Mine is that it was never supposed to be reopened. The geological survey that brought me there in September 2023 was commissioned by Apex Mining Corporation to assess the structural integrity of abandoned gold mining tunnels throughout rural Nevada. What we found 800 feet below ground changed everything I thought I knew about reality, and the entities we awakened down there are still hunting for a way to reach the surface world. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm a geological engineer with 15 years of experience surveying unstable mining sites across the American Southwest. I've been in collapsed tunnels, flooded shafts, and caverns filled with toxic gases. I thought I had seen every possible danger that underground environments could present. I was catastrophically wrong. The supernatural forces dwelling in Devil's Canyon Mine operate according to rules that our scientific instruments cannot measure and our human minds cannot fully comprehend. Devil's Canyon Mine sits approximately 40 miles northeast of Tonopah, Nevada, in a stretch of desert so remote that cellular service doesn't exist, and GPS signals become unreliable. The original mining operation began in 1887, when prospectors discovered rich gold veins running through an unusual rock formation that local Shoshone tribes had warned them never to disturb. The indigenous people called the area Puha Sogobia, the place where evil spirits dwell beneath the earth. The miners ignored these warnings, and for 23 years they extracted millions of dollars worth of gold from tunnels that extended over 200 feet into the mountainside. The mining operation ceased abruptly in 1910, following what official records describe as a catastrophic structural failure that killed 47 miners during the night shift. Survivor accounts from that incident describe phenomena that don't align with any known geological processes. Temperatures that plummeted to below freezing in specific tunnel sections while remaining normal elsewhere, mining equipment that malfunctioned in ways that violated basic mechanical principles, and sounds emanating from deep within the mountain that had nothing to do with settling rock or underground water movement. The most disturbing detail from the 1910 incident involves the testimony of Jacob Morrison, the only miner who escaped from the deepest tunnel section before the collapse. Morrison claimed that the cave-in wasn't caused by structural instability, but by something moving through the rock itself, something that created new passages as it traveled and sealed others behind it. His account describes entities that existed in the spaces between solid matter, beings that could manipulate physical reality, according to principles that human science has never documented. Morrison spent the remaining 18 years of his life in the Nevada State Hospital, drawing incomprehensible diagrams of geometric shapes that he claimed represented the true structure of reality as revealed by the things living beneath Devil's Canyon. Apex Mining Corporation acquired the mineral rights to Devil's Canyon in 2019, with plans to utilize modern extraction techniques to safely access remaining gold deposits. The company hired our geological survey firm to assess whether the old tunnel system could support contemporary mining operations or whether new shafts would need to be excavated. Our 3-person team arrived on site September 15, 2023, with enough equipment and supplies to conduct a comprehensive 5-day underground survey. My colleagues were Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, a structural engineer specializing in mining safety, and Jennifer Walsh, a geophysicist whose expertise involved analyzing subsurface mineral compositions using ground-penetrating radar and seismic imaging equipment. We had worked together on similar projects throughout Nevada, Arizona, and Colorado, and our professional relationship was built on mutual respect and methodical attention to safety protocols. None of us believed in supernatural phenomena, and our scientific training had taught us to find rational explanations for even the most unusual underground conditions we encountered. The entrance to Devil's Canyon Mine consists of a reinforced concrete portal built into the mountainside with heavy steel doors that had been sealed with industrial locks since 1910. Apex Mining had provided us with cutting equipment to remove these barriers, and we spent our first morning on site preparing our gear and establishing surface communication equipment. The September desert heat was intense, reaching 104 degrees Fahrenheit by noon, but the mine entrance emanated a noticeably cooler air current that suggested extensive underground passages with good ventilation. Our initial descent into the mine proceeded according to standard safety procedures. We wore full protective gear including hard hats, breathing apparatus, and emergency beacon devices that would allow surface rescue teams to locate us in case of emergency. The main tunnel extended into the mountain at a 15-degree downward angle, with support beams and rail tracks that remained in remarkably good condition, despite over a century of abandonment. Our portable lighting equipment illuminated roughly 50 feet ahead as we proceeded deeper underground. The first unusual phenomenon occurred approximately 200 feet from the entrance, when our digital thermometers began registering temperature fluctuations that defied logical explanation. The ambient air temperature remained steady at 62 degrees Fahrenheit, which was consistent with typical underground conditions, but specific sections of tunnel wall measured significantly colder. Some areas dropped to 38 degrees, while adjacent sections maintained normal temperatures. These cold spots appeared to move gradually along the walls as we observed them, creating patterns that suggested intentional movement rather than natural thermal variation. Dr. Rodriguez attempted to document these temperature anomalies using thermal imaging equipment, but our cameras malfunctioned in ways that our technical training couldn't explain. The devices would operate normally when pointed at most tunnel surfaces, but would display impossible readings when focused on the cold spots. Negative temperatures that would require conditions not found in nature, and geometric heat patterns that resembled complex mathematical equations rather than thermal gradients. When we tried to photograph these anomalous readings, our cameras would shut down entirely, and the image files became corrupted with data that our computer systems couldn't interpret. Jennifer's ground-penetrating radar equipment produced even more disturbing results when we attempted to map the tunnel system's overall structure. Standard GPR technology sends electromagnetic pulses through rock and soil, creating detailed images of subsurface features based on how these signals reflect off different materials. In Devil's Canyon mine, the radar signals were being reflected in ways that suggested the presence of massive hollow spaces where solid rock should exist, and these spaces seemed to change configuration during the time we spent observing them. The radar images showed tunnel networks that extended far beyond what historical mining records indicated, with passages branching off in directions that would require excavating through solid granite formations. More troubling were the movement patterns detected by our equipment. The radar showed objects roughly human-sized traveling through these unmapped tunnels at speeds that would be impossible for actual humans navigating underground passages. These moving signatures appeared to be tracking parallel to our location, maintaining consistent distance as we proceeded deeper into the mine. By the end of our first day underground, we had documented 17 distinct anomalies that our scientific instruments couldn't adequately explain. The temperature variations continued following us throughout the tunnel system. The electromagnetic interference was affecting all of our electronic equipment, and the seismic monitoring devices were registering vibrations that corresponded to no known geological processes. We should have returned to the surface and recommended that Apex Mining abandon their plans to reopen Devil's Canyon mine. Instead, our scientific curiosity compelled us to continue deeper into the mountain, seeking rational explanations for phenomena that existed beyond the boundaries of rational explanation. The second day of our survey began with an equipment malfunction that should have served as a definitive warning to evacuate the mine immediately. Our emergency communication system, which maintained constant contact with surface support teams through hardwired connections, began transmitting signals that contained no human voices. Instead, the communication line carried sounds that resembled metallic grinding, mixed with what could only be described as whispered conversations in languages that didn't correspond to any known human linguistic patterns. Dr. Rodriguez spent 2 hours attempting to troubleshoot the communication system, while Jennifer and I continued mapping the tunnel network using manual measurement techniques. The sounds coming through our communication equipment became more distinct as we worked, and we began to discern individual voices speaking in rhythmic patterns that resembled chanting or ritual incantations. The whispers seemed to respond to our presence. When we stopped moving, the sounds would cease, and when we resumed our work, they would continue with increased intensity. Our attempts to record these audio phenomena produced results that challenged our understanding of how sound transmission works in underground environments. The recording equipment would capture our own voices with perfect clarity, but would fail to register any of the whispered sounds that we could hear distinctly through the communication system. When we played back our recordings, they contained extended periods of complete silence during times when the whispers had been most audible, suggesting that whatever was producing these sounds existed in acoustic frequencies that our equipment couldn't detect. The deeper we proceeded into the mine, the more our scientific instruments began operating according to principles that contradicted basic physics. Magnetic compasses would spin wildly when pointed in specific directions, then function normally when turned away from those areas. Our altimeters indicated that we were descending far below the actual depth of the tunnel system, showing readings that would place us nearly 1,000 feet underground when we had traveled less than 400 feet from the entrance. Most disturbing were the readings from our radiation detection equipment, which began registering energy signatures that didn't match any known radioactive isotopes. Jennifer's expertise in geophysical analysis allowed her to recognize that the energy signatures we were detecting corresponded to theoretical particles that existed only in quantum physics equations. The radiation detectors were showing evidence of subatomic interactions that required environmental conditions not found anywhere on Earth, temperature and pressure combinations that existed only in the cores of dying stars or in the moments following the creation of black holes. According to our scientific understanding, these readings were impossible, yet our calibrated equipment was consistently documenting their presence throughout the deeper sections of Devil's Canyon mine. By midday of our second day underground, we had reached a section of tunnel that didn't appear on any historical mining maps. The passage opened into a natural cavern approximately 60 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling that our portable lights couldn't fully illuminate. The walls of this cavern were composed of rock formations that didn't match the geological composition of the surrounding mountain, displaying crystalline structures that seemed to generate their own faint luminescence. The air in this space carried a metallic taste, and our breathing apparatus indicated atmospheric conditions that should have been toxic to human respiratory systems. The most unnerving feature of this cavern was a circular depression in the center of the floor, approximately 12 feet in diameter, that descended beyond the range of our lighting equipment. When we dropped illuminated markers into this opening, we could observe them falling for approximately 15 seconds before the light disappeared into darkness. Using basic physics calculations, this indicated a vertical shaft extending at least 100 feet straight down, which would place it far below the water table and into geological formations that should have been solid bedrock. Our attempts to measure the depth of this shaft using sonar equipment produced results that violated fundamental principles of acoustic physics. The sonar pulses would return with echo patterns indicating multiple different depths simultaneously. Some readings suggested the shaft extended 200 feet down, while others indicated depths of over 3,000 feet. More disturbing were the echo returns that arrived before our sonar device had finished transmitting its pulse, suggesting that sound waves were somehow traveling back to us from the future, or that the normal relationship between cause and effect didn't apply in this underground environment. Dr. Rodriguez decided to anchor a measuring cable to the edge of the shaft and lower our most sensitive recording equipment to document conditions in the deeper sections. As the cable descended, our instruments began registering environmental data that challenged every principle of underground geology we had studied. The temperature readings showed a gradual increase with depth, which was consistent with normal geothermal conditions, but at approximately 300 feet down, the temperature suddenly dropped to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, then fluctuated wildly between extreme heat and impossible cold as the equipment continued descending. The atmospheric analysis being transmitted from our descending instruments indicated the presence of gases that don't exist in nature, complex molecular structures that our chemistry databases couldn't identify, and pressure readings that suggested the air density was changing according to rules that defied the laws of physics. At 500 feet of cable depth, our equipment began detecting movement in the shaft around it, not the simple air currents that would be expected in a vertical passage, but organized motion that suggested the presence of large objects moving with purposeful intent. The final readings transmitted from our descending equipment, just before the cable went slack, indicating that something had severed it at approximately 600 feet depth, showed energy signatures that corresponded to theoretical descriptions of interdimensional boundary zones. According to quantum physics theories, these are locations where the normal rules of reality become fluid and alternative dimensions can intersect with our physical universe. The detection of such phenomena in an underground mining shaft should have been impossible, yet our calibrated scientific instruments were providing consistent evidence that Devil's Canyon mine contained a gateway to somewhere that existed beyond the boundaries of known reality. The loss of our equipment in the shaft marked the beginning of active supernatural manifestations that could no longer be dismissed as instrument malfunctions or unusual geological conditions. As we prepared to retreat from the cavern and return toward the mine entrance, the luminescent crystals in the walls began pulsing with increased brightness, creating patterns of light that resembled complex communication signals. The metallic whispers that we had been hearing through our communication system became audible throughout the cavern without any electronic amplification, and the voices began speaking in English. The entities inhabiting Devil's Canyon Mine began communicating directly with us, revealing knowledge about our personal lives that no earthly intelligence could have possessed. They knew details about our childhood experiences, our professional failures, our private fears that we had never shared with anyone. They described our family members by name and location, and they made specific threats about what would happen to these people if we continued our survey of their underground domain. The supernatural beings dwelling in the mine demonstrated comprehensive awareness of our surface world while making it clear that their own existence operated according to principles that rendered them invulnerable to any defensive measures we might attempt. Jennifer was the first member of our team to experience direct physical contact with the entities. As we prepared our equipment for retreat from the cavern, she was examining crystalline formations along the north wall when something grabbed her arm from within the solid rock. Her screams echoed throughout the space as she was pulled partway into the stone wall, with her shoulder and upper arm disappearing into rock that appeared completely solid to our observation. Dr. Rodriguez and I grabbed her legs and pulled with all our strength, while Jennifer described the sensation of being dragged through spaces that existed between the molecules of solid matter. The rescue took nearly 10 minutes of sustained effort, during which Jennifer remained conscious and able to describe her experience of existing partially in our physical dimension and partially in the domain inhabited by the mine's supernatural entities. She reported that the space within the rock was filled with geometric structures that hurt to perceive directly, and populated by beings that existed as constantly shifting patterns of energy and malevolent intent. These entities communicated through direct mental contact, flooding her consciousness with images of the suffering they had inflicted on previous humans who had disturbed their underground realm. When we finally succeeded in pulling Jennifer free from the rock wall, her arm bore physical evidence of contact with forces that operated beyond normal reality. Her skin displayed burn patterns in geometric shapes that resembled the mathematical equations our malfunctioning instruments had been detecting, and these burns continued changing configuration as we observed them. The geometric patterns seemed to be alive, spreading slowly across her skin and causing pain that our emergency medical supplies couldn't alleviate. More disturbing was Jennifer's report that she could still feel the mental connection with the entities, and that they were using this link to monitor our activities and plan their response to our intrusion. Our retreat from the cavern became a fighting withdrawal against supernatural forces that could manipulate our physical environment in ways that made escape increasingly difficult. The tunnel passages that we had mapped during our descent were reconfiguring themselves as we attempted to navigate back toward the surface, creating dead ends where none had existed, and opening new passages that led deeper into the mountain instead of toward the entrance. Our lighting equipment began failing systematically, not through battery depletion or mechanical breakdown, but through what appeared to be deliberate sabotage by entities that could interact with electronic systems through unknown methods. The temperature control that had been gradually affecting our equipment became a directed assault on our physiological systems. The air around us would suddenly become suffocatingly hot, forcing us to remove protective gear, then immediately shift to freezing conditions that caused hypothermic symptoms within minutes. These temperature attacks were precisely coordinated to force us into physical distress while preventing us from maintaining the equipment necessary for safe navigation through the unstable tunnel system. Dr. Rodriguez began experiencing auditory hallucinations that seemed designed to separate him from Jennifer and myself by convincing him that we were calling for help from directions that led away from the exit route. The entities were demonstrating sophisticated psychological warfare capabilities, using our human instincts for mutual assistance as weapons to divide our group and isolate us for individual attack. When Rodriguez wandered off following these false distress calls, Jennifer and I could hear his genuine cries for help coming from multiple directions simultaneously, as if the supernatural forces were using acoustic manipulation to prevent us from locating him accurately. The rescue of Dr. Rodriguez required us to split our remaining resources and venture into unmapped tunnel sections where the entity's influence was strongest. Jennifer's ongoing mental connection with the supernatural forces allowed her to sense their general locations, but this psychic link was also causing progressive psychological damage that manifested as severe paranoia and visual hallucinations. She reported seeing geometric patterns overlaid on every surface, mathematical equations that described the structure of reality in terms that human consciousness wasn't designed to comprehend. We found Rodriguez approximately 400 feet down a side passage that hadn't existed during our initial survey, trapped in a section of tunnel where the rock walls were gradually moving closer together. The supernatural entities had created a crushing trap that would slowly compress him to death while forcing Jennifer and me to listen to his final moments. The rescue required us to use our remaining explosive charges, originally intended for clearing minor rockfall obstacles, to blast through rock formations that reformed immediately after each explosion. The explosive charges revealed the true extent of the supernatural force's control over physical matter in Devil's Canyon mine. Each blast would create an opening that allowed us to advance several feet toward Rodriguez's location, but the displaced rock would flow like liquid to seal the passage behind us, preventing retreat. The entities were allowing us to save our colleague while ensuring that all 3 team members became trapped in the deeper sections of the mine, where their influence was absolute. By the time we reached Rodriguez and freed him from the crushing trap, we were approximately 800 feet from the mine entrance and surrounded by tunnel configurations that changed continuously to prevent navigation toward the surface. Our remaining equipment was failing through supernatural interference that targeted the specific components necessary for emergency survival underground. The emergency oxygen supplies developed leaks that our repair equipment couldn't seal. The backup lighting systems produced illumination that revealed disturbing images instead of actual tunnel conditions. And our first aid supplies were contaminated with substances that our chemical analysis couldn't identify. The entities began manifesting physically as we attempted to navigate through the constantly shifting tunnel system. These beings appeared as geometric configurations of light and shadow that moved independently of any light sources, creating visual distortions that made accurate perception of distances and directions impossible. The supernatural forces could extend portions of themselves through solid rock, emerging from walls and ceiling to physically interact with us while remaining anchored in dimensions that our human senses couldn't fully perceive. Physical contact with these entities produced effects that violated biological principles. When the geometric light patterns touched our skin, they left marks that resembled complex circuit boards, etched into human flesh. These marks were not simple burns or cuts, but 3-dimensional structures that extended into our bodies and connected with nervous system pathways. The supernatural beings were installing organic technology that allowed them to monitor our physiological functions and influence our decision-making processes through direct neural interface. Jennifer's condition deteriorated rapidly as the entity markings spread across her body, creating networks of supernatural circuitry that caused severe pain and granted the underground beings increasing control over her actions. She began moving in ways that weren't consistent with human locomotion, her joints bending at angles that should have caused bone fractures, and her speech patterns shifting to match the rhythmic chanting we had heard through our communication equipment. The entities were using her as a bridge between their dimension and ours, transforming her into a hybrid being capable of existing in both realms simultaneously. Dr. Rodriguez and I realized that Jennifer was becoming a permanent extension of the supernatural forces inhabiting Devil's Canyon mine. But our attempts to help her resulted in attacks that demonstrated the entity's growing influence over physical reality in our immediate environment. When we tried to examine the spreading marks on her skin, our hands would pass through her body as if she were becoming incorporeal, yet she could still interact with solid objects around her. The boundaries between dimensions were breaking down in her vicinity, creating spatial distortions that made basic navigation impossible. Our escape from Devil's Canyon mine required abandoning Jennifer to the supernatural forces that were transforming her into something no longer human. The decision tormented both Rodriguez and me, but the entities made it clear that they would consume all 3 of us if we remained in their domain, attempting a rescue that had become impossible. Jennifer herself, during brief moments when her original personality reasserted control, begged us to leave her and warned surface authorities never to reopen the mine or attempt any form of mining operation in the area. The supernatural beings allowed Rodriguez and me to reach the mine entrance, but they made it clear that our escape was a deliberate choice on their part rather than any success of our own efforts. They wanted witnesses to survive and spread knowledge of their existence, serving as warnings that would prevent large-scale mining operations that might threaten their underground domain. However, they also marked us with lasting connections that would allow them to monitor our activities and influence our decisions regarding any future disclosures about Devil's Canyon mine. The physical evidence of our encounter with the supernatural entities became more apparent after we reached the surface and received medical attention at the nearest hospital in Tonopah. The geometric markings on our skin were visible under specific lighting conditions and caused constant pain that conventional medications couldn't alleviate. X-ray examinations revealed three-dimensional structures within our bodies that didn't correspond to any known human anatomy, and blood tests showed the presence of elements that don't exist in the periodic table. More disturbing than the physical effects were the psychological changes that became apparent in the weeks following our escape from the mine. Both Rodriguez and I began experiencing shared dreams that contained detailed information about other supernatural entities inhabiting underground locations throughout the American Southwest. The beings in Devil's Canyon mine were part of a larger network of interdimensional forces that had been displaced from their original realm and were using abandoned mining sites as gateway points to establish permanent presence in our physical universe. The dreams revealed that mining operations throughout Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, and Utah had unknowingly breached barriers between dimensions, creating access points that allowed supernatural entities to infiltrate our reality. These beings were not malevolent in human terms, but operated according to survival imperatives that made human life irrelevant to their objectives. They viewed our mining activities as territorial invasions that required defensive responses, and they possessed capabilities that made resistance futile for individual humans or small groups. Our attempts to report the supernatural phenomena at Devil's Canyon mine to appropriate authorities resulted in responses that suggested the entity's influence extended beyond their underground domain. Officials at Apex Mining Corporation had knowledge of previous incidents at similar locations and had established protocols for managing encounters with interdimensional forces that prioritized corporate liability over public safety. Federal agencies responsible for mining oversight possessed classified files documenting supernatural phenomena at dozens of extraction sites. But these reports were buried under security classifications that prevented public disclosure. Dr. Rodriguez suffered a complete psychological breakdown 6 weeks after our escape from the mine, requiring hospitalization at a secure psychiatric facility where he continues to receive treatment for conditions that mental health professionals can't adequately diagnose. His medical records describe symptoms that don't match any known psychological disorders, including the ability to perceive and interact with geometric patterns that exist outside normal visual perception. The facility's staff reports that Rodriguez spends most of his time drawing mathematical equations that describe interdimensional physics concepts beyond current scientific understanding. My own psychological condition remains stable, but permanently altered by the supernatural connection established during our encounter with the entities in Devil's Canyon mine. I can sense the presence of similar interdimensional gateways throughout the Southwest, and I receive periodic mental communications from the beings we encountered underground. These communications contain warnings about specific mining operations that would result in larger-scale supernatural incursions, and instructions about how to minimize entity encounters for individuals who must work in areas where dimensional boundaries have been compromised. The entities have made it clear that Devil's Canyon mine represents only one small access point in a much larger supernatural infrastructure that spans multiple dimensions and connects underground locations throughout North America. They describe their presence in our reality as a refugee situation, forced displacement from their original dimensional realm by cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. Their defensive responses to mining operations are attempts to establish secure territorial boundaries that would allow coexistence with human civilization without direct conflict. However, the supernatural beings also acknowledge that human mining technology is becoming increasingly capable of accessing deeper underground areas where major dimensional gateways are located. If large-scale extraction operations breach these primary access points, the resulting supernatural incursions would involve entities whose capabilities far exceed those we encountered at Devil's Canyon mine. The beings we faced were relatively minor representatives of interdimensional forces whose full manifestation would represent an existential threat to human civilization. Apex Mining Corporation ultimately canceled their planned operations at Devil's Canyon mine, citing geological instability concerns that made the site unsuitable for contemporary extraction techniques. The official reports filed with federal regulators contain no mention of supernatural phenomena or interdimensional entities, describing only standard mining hazards and equipment malfunctions. Jennifer Walsh was listed as a casualty of tunnel collapse, with her body never recovered due to unsafe conditions that prevented thorough search operations. The mine entrance has been resealed with industrial barriers and warning signs that cite structural instability and toxic gas hazards as reasons for public exclusion from the area. However, Local residents in Tonopah report unusual phenomena in the vicinity of Devil's Canyon, including unexplained lights visible from the mine entrance at night, electronic interference that affects vehicles traveling nearby highways, and wildlife behavioral patterns that suggest animals are avoiding the entire region. My attempts to establish contact with other geological survey professionals who might have encountered similar supernatural phenomena have revealed a pattern of incident suppression that extends throughout the mining industry. Engineers and scientists who report interdimensional encounters are typically transferred to administrative positions or encouraged to accept early retirement packages that include comprehensive non-disclosure agreements. The supernatural entities inhabiting underground mining sites have developed cooperative relationships with corporate and government entities that prioritize resource extraction over public safety concerns. The ongoing psychological connection between myself and the entities in Devil's Canyon Mine provides me with information about the expanding supernatural presence throughout American mining regions. The interdimensional beings are establishing territorial networks that connect underground sites across multiple states, creating infrastructure that would support large-scale dimensional incursions if human mining activities continue encroaching on their primary gateway locations. Recent communications from the entities describe increasingly sophisticated supernatural manifestations at mining sites throughout Nevada, with encounters involving government personnel and military units specialized in paranormal response operations. The interdimensional forces are adapting their defensive strategies to address organized human responses, developing capabilities that neutralize advanced technology and render conventional weapons ineffective against supernatural threats. The beings in Devil's Canyon Mine have made it clear that my survival and continued freedom depend on my willingness to serve as an early warning system for mining operations that would trigger major supernatural responses. They monitor my professional activities and provide guidance about geological survey projects that should be avoided or modified to prevent interdimensional breaches. This arrangement allows me to continue working while serving the entity's interest in maintaining controlled coexistence with human civilization. However, the supernatural forces have also indicated that this cooperative arrangement is temporary and dependent on human mining activities remaining within boundaries that don't threaten their primary dimensional gateway sites. If large-scale operations begin targeting the deeper underground locations where major entity populations are established, the beings will respond with incursions that overwhelm human defensive capabilities and establish permanent supernatural control over significant geographic areas. The entities describe these potential incursions in terms that suggest they would involve fundamental alterations to physical reality in affected regions. The interdimensional forces possess capabilities that could modify the basic laws of physics, creating environmental conditions that would support supernatural beings while making human survival impossible. These reality alterations would be permanent and would spread gradually from their points of origin, eventually covering significant portions of North America. My role as an unwilling liaison between human mining interests and interdimensional entities has provided me with knowledge about supernatural capabilities that extend far beyond what we encountered in Devil's Canyon Mine. The beings inhabiting these underground sites represent advanced scouts for much larger supernatural populations that exist in parallel dimensions. If human activities trigger major defensive responses, the resulting conflict would involve forces whose abilities make nuclear weapons seem primitive by comparison. The mathematical equations that I continue receiving through my psychic connection with the entities describe reality manipulation techniques that could reshape matter and energy, according to principles that human science cannot comprehend. The supernatural beings could transform entire mountain ranges into interdimensional gateways, alter atmospheric composition to support entity physiology, and modify human consciousness on a population scale to create hybrid beings serving supernatural objectives. These communications have convinced me that the entities in Devil's Canyon Mine, despite their terrifying capabilities, represent relatively benevolent forces compared to the supernatural populations they serve as intermediaries for. The beings we encountered are trying to establish boundaries that would prevent larger-scale conflicts, but human mining expansion continues approaching threshold levels that would trigger responses involving much more dangerous interdimensional forces. The progressive development of my psychic connection with the supernatural entities has also revealed the extent to which these beings have already infiltrated human institutions responsible for mining oversight and regulation. Government agencies possess detailed knowledge about interdimensional phenomena and have established secret protocols for managing supernatural encounters, but these programs prioritize resource extraction over public safety and rely on suppression rather than genuine protective measures. The entities describe human government cooperation with supernatural forces as a temporary alliance of convenience that will be terminated when interdimensional objectives no longer align with human interests. The beings are using official cooperation to establish territorial boundaries and gateway infrastructure, but they view human civilization as ultimately incompatible with their long-term survival requirements in this dimensional realm. My ongoing communications with the entities in Devil's Canyon Mine have made it clear that the supernatural incursions currently occurring throughout American mining regions represent the early stages of a dimensional colonization process that will eventually transform significant portions of our reality into environments suitable for interdimensional beings. Human attempts to resist this process would trigger defensive responses that would accelerate rather than prevent supernatural transformation of our physical world. The knowledge that I have gained through my unwilling connection with these entities has left me in an impossible position. I cannot warn human authorities without triggering supernatural responses that would worsen the situation, but I cannot remain silent while interdimensional forces continue expanding their presence in our reality. The entities monitor my communications and would respond to any disclosure attempts with measures that would eliminate both me and anyone who received warning information. The supernatural beings in Devil's Canyon Mine continue to exist and expand their influence throughout the underground tunnel systems of the American Southwest. They have established territorial networks that connect dozens of abandoned mining sites, creating interdimensional infrastructure that supports increasingly large supernatural populations. These entities remain invincible by human standards and continue pursuing objectives that will ultimately transform our physical reality according to their dimensional requirements. Jennifer Walsh remains trapped in Devil's Canyon Mine, transformed into a hybrid being that serves as a permanent bridge between our dimension and the supernatural realm inhabited by the entities. Her consciousness continues to exist, but has been modified to support interdimensional functions that human minds weren't designed to perform. The entities use her as a communication interface and monitoring system that provides them with comprehensive intelligence about human activities in the region. Dr. Rodriguez's condition continues deteriorating as the supernatural modifications to his nervous system become more extensive. His ability to perceive interdimensional phenomena has developed beyond human psychological limits, causing permanent damage to his capacity for normal reality perception. The entities view his condition as a successful experiment in human consciousness modification that provides valuable data for future hybrid creation projects. The mine itself has become a permanent gateway between dimensions, with supernatural activity increasing rather than diminishing over time. The entities have transformed the deeper tunnel sections into spaces that operate according to interdimensional physics principles, creating environmental conditions that support supernatural beings while remaining lethal to unmodified humans. These transformed spaces are expanding gradually through the surrounding rock formations, extending the entity's territorial control beyond the original mining infrastructure. If this true supernatural horror story has left you questioning what other interdimensional threats might be lurking beneath America's abandoned mining sites, like this video to support more authentic paranormal content that reveals the terrifying realities hidden from public knowledge. Subscribe and ring that notification bell because the entities monitoring our activities want these warnings spread to prevent larger-scale supernatural incursions that would devastate human civilization. Your subscription helps ensure these critical warnings reach people who work in geological survey, mining operations, and remote locations where interdimensional gateways might be encountered. Comment below sharing any unexplained experiences you've had in underground locations, abandoned mines, or areas where electronic equipment malfunctions without explanation. The supernatural entities are establishing territorial networks throughout the American Southwest, and your encounters might provide crucial information about their expanding influence. Share this video with anyone involved in mining, geological survey, cave exploration, or outdoor adventure activities in Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, or Utah. The interdimensional forces are actively seeking to prevent large-scale mining operations that would trigger major supernatural responses, and spreading awareness about these threats serves both human and entity interests in avoiding catastrophic conflicts. Join our community of survivors and witnesses who have encountered supernatural forces that challenge everything we think we know about reality. Together, we can document these phenomena while respecting the territorial boundaries established by beings whose capabilities far exceed human understanding. Remember, Some places on Earth were never meant to be disturbed, and the entities dwelling in these locations will defend their territory using methods that make human resistance impossible. Stay safe, stay aware, and never venture into abandoned mining sites without understanding the supernatural risks that modern science refuses to acknowledge.